I think it was pretty clear, right? All you have to do is ask about that person. You can test that person, and it becomes relatively clear on how to do that. But how do you determine a person's religiosity, right? Like how religious a person is. And inshallah, we're going to spend a little bit more time discussing that. Adala. So there's a lot, adala and dabt. So inshallah, we're going to spend more time with adala because I think dabt is a little bit more straightforward. So what we're going to talk about today is like, okay, well, what if I have a difference of opinion over a narrator? How do I actually engage in that? If I have a narrator that is like, for example, Imam Bukhari. Are there people who are going to criticize Imam Bukhari? Yeah, absolutely, right? He's a human being, he's a person. Obviously he made mistakes, just like other human beings make mistakes. So the question then comes is like, okay, well, if you have people who are generally agreed upon, does it require a lot of research? No, it doesn't. The question then comes is like, all right, well, when I have a difference of opinion concerning a particular narrator, how do I actually engage it? And what are the types of differences of opinion that exist concerning that narrator? So there are basically two stages when it comes to researching a narrator. The first one is identifying, right? Who exactly is that narrator, right? And if I don't know who he is, how am I going to research him? And the second one is, where are his narrations? And in general, like these are the two things that I would look into, and these are the two things I would research. And I know it looks like pretty simplistic, but we'll spend a little bit more time with this. Okay, it's like, okay, well, how can something so simple take so long, or how can it be so complicated? And it does take a little bit of time. Happened? Oh. Okay, here we go. So identifying. How do I identify a narrator? What are some things? So based on the books that we had in the past and some of the discussions that we had before, how do I actually find a narrator? Okay. All right, cool. So I look at a chain, I see a narrator, and I have, for example, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. What do I do then? So like, it's easy, right? So Muhammad Abdullah, there's only one Muhammad ibn Abdullah in Islamic history. Okay, so these are different other signs I can look for. But if I just have one chain, am I actually going to be able to differentiate that narrator from other narrators? Right? It'll be tough. So if I have a name like Muhammad ibn Abdullah, what are some other things I can do? So Miguel, he mentioned that, okay, well, what if can I look up his nickname, or can I look up a moniker, can I look up an honorific? Is there some extra information that I can find to help me determine that? So what are some things that we've discussed in the past to actually help me determine and identify who this narrator is? What do I have just with this chain? What is some information I have that can help me identify?
Like the time frame.
Okay, sure, time frame. So I have an idea of when he lived, so that helps narrow down the search. What are the other things are in that chain?
Who he narrated from.
Ahsant, right? So who he narrated from and who he narrated to, right? So now I have an idea of his teachers and his students. That will help narrow it down. What are some other things I can look? Right, so that would be, now we're going to have to start looking outside the chain, right? But I'm talking about with the chain itself, what are some things that will help me kind of narrow my search, right? Because I can go and just start looking, right? I can just take the name, and what can I do? I can just go search. I can put in a program, Muhammad Abdullah, I have like 342,000 hits, right? Does that help me? No, not really. I need some... I need to put in more information to kind of help me narrow it down. You guys mentioned some things, yeah.
You know who he studied, where he studied.
So now I have the when, I have the where, and I have his teachers, and I have his students. With this information now, does this help me narrow it down? Yes, it'll actually help me narrow it down significantly. Now I can start looking outside. And what are some things that I can look for outside to help me identify that narrator?
The scholars would collect the names of the narrators.
Yes, ahsant. So you have books of tarajum, right? Or you have books of tawarikh. These books, they collect different narrators into different categories and in different ways of putting them together. Many of them, or if not most of them, in alphabetical order. And then you have books of masanid, which also will organize them, but all under that organization, they'll put all of the narrations from that particular narrator. So there are different ways that these narrators are organized. With those additional narrators, those additional narrations, what information can I get from those? In addition to all of those other things we talked about. So we talked about the when, the where, his teachers, and the students.
You can also get information who used him as a...
Okay, so this is another good way.
So
Which scholar used him in his book, and how did he use him? That's excellent. That gives me an understanding of what the ruling was, right? Because you have a theoretical discussion of what the scholar said about him, and then you have a practical discussion in how the scholars actually used him.
So it gives you context.
It gives me context, right? It helps me understand. So for example, if I have a narrator and I have a bunch of scholars saying that, he is like, he's weak and he has problems and like his teachers are like this and blah, 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 and then I find his hadith in Sahih Muslim.
You can also tell from his hadith what topic he usually discusses.
Yeah, okay. So you have a hadith that are organized by mawdu', right, by topic, and I can look into that topic and I'll find...
That particular
yeah.
narrator used to narrate a particular hadith only.
Okay. Yeah, in a particular science, or used to narrate particular specific hadith, right? And there's no doubt about that. The other information I can get is every time if I have other parallel narrations of him, do they sometimes share more information about the narrator in the chain?
Yes.
So for example, yes, like what?
There's more content to the narration. So it's like when you have the clusters in Muslim, the one on the top is the most complete, right? So
All right, that's in Muslim, but I'm talking about this narrator in particular. What is some information that I might be able to find in other chains that will help me in identifying? Is it possible other chains will mention his laqab, like his honorific or his nickname? Right, that's possible. Is it possible that they'll mention where he's specifically from? Right, so it's also possible they'll mention in his grandfather's name. So this narration I have Muhammad ibn Abdullah. This one I have Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Ahmad. Right now that helps me narrow my search significantly. So these are the things that I would look for in parallel chains. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is there an actual difference of opinion concerning the narrator? We had mentioned before that sometimes we will find critiques of scholars and we'll find critiques of narrators, but do those critiques necessarily translate into weakening that narrator?
Not necessarily.
So the example we had given at the beginning of class was like Imam Bukhari. Were there scholars that criticized him? Absolutely, there were scholars that criticized him. Does that remove him from his Imam position? No, it doesn't. Right? So sometimes you'll be like, oh, well, there's a difference of opinion here, right? You have scholars that praise him and scholars that criticize him.
That particular scholar might be really harsh.
There's a number of possibilities, right? There's a number of possibilities, but sometimes those criticisms or those praise, they have no final effect on the ruling concerning that particular narrator. So if there's a general agreement concerning a narrator, if there's general agreement concerning a narrator, is that something that's worth researching? No. Why? Right. If most people agree that he's trustworthy, then he's going to be trustworthy. If most scholars agree that he's a liar, right? Does it make sense to be like, okay, well, no, there are some scholars that said he was trustworthy and he was good. Why am I going to waste my time researching that? The other thing, is there a stark difference of opinion concerning the narrator? And we had talked about this before, that sometimes you have certain phrases or certain statements that appear to be what?
The phrase might be meaning, but means something else.
Right, so there might be a different meaning to what is said. Right, so if I have a whole bunch, and we had given an example like this, like, he's thiqa, like he's trustworthy, he's honest, he's upright, and then one scholar was like, man, he's a shaitan. But what did he mean by that? He's so smart, he's like, it's almost devious. He's so intelligent, he's almost devious. So he wasn't actually disparaging him, he was what?
Praising.
He was actually praising him. So it's important to understand, like, is there a huge, and if there isn't a huge difference of opinion, what does that mean?
It means you should, it's trustworthy or...
Meaning you have a ruling, right? You have a final ruling on him. And again, does that deserve and need to be researched? And the answer is going to be no. And even though this is rare. It doesn't happen too much, right? This doesn't happen too much. And like we said, there's no need to investigate his reports, just the statements around him. Why?
It's so overwhelming on women, right?
Because the difference of opinion is so stark, right? So for example, if I had a difference of opinion concerning our narrator, where one said, man, he's thiqah, he's trustworthy, and he's upright, and he's righteous, and then one says that he's a liar. Right? These are completely polar opposites. And I have a list of scholars that say this and a list of scholars that say this. What do I do? Does that deserve investigation? Absolutely. And that's all that I'm saying here. Right? That's all that I'm saying here, is when you have like such a stark difference of opinion, and it's very clear that there's a difference of opinion, then that is something that deserves an investigation. And I don't necessarily need to look at the reports. Now I need to look into the reasons of why what they're saying what they're saying.
Something that's rare, right?
Yeah, it's rare. It doesn't happen very often. Some examples, we have Muhammad ibn Ishaq, where you have like a stark difference of opinion on scholars and what they say about him. Abdullah ibn Lahiya, again, another narrator who there's a stark difference of opinion concerning about. Nafi Shadi, this is Ibn Sayyid al-Nas. It's his explanation of Jami' al-Tirmidhi. Right? It's just an explanation. And these two people, there's a person who did a critical edition of this. Now, a critical edition is basically what you do is you take the original manuscript and you turn the manuscript into a printed form. Right, that's what's called a critical edition. How does that happen? Is you take a manuscript, 2, 3, 4 manuscripts, and what you do is you compare them, and then you try to put it in book form. Right? You try to put it in a printed form to bring it forward. I think this was Ahmed Ma'bad. He's the one that did a critical edition on this. He has like a 90-page discussion on him, and like I don't remember, like it's like an 80-page discussion on him. Where do I find these narrations? And over here, what's saying is like, okay, if I'm investigating a narrator, one of the things that I need to investigate and look into are his narrations. Right? I need to look into his hadith. Is it enough for me to look into the 6 books? Is it enough for me to look into the 9 books? Why? How come I can't just use those?
Because those 6 or 9 books are, so the hadith are like,
So here, are all of the hadith in these books?
that's what I'm saying, not all of them are.
Right. So there are hadith that are outside of this book.
Outside.
But why does it matter?
I mean,
Yes.
Is it because in those books we sort of select for the most authentic ones, but
Okay.
we can learn a lot from the inauthentic ones too?
Sure. Okay, so over here, you're going to have a skewed sample size, right? It's going to be skewed because in general, right? Not every single one, but in general, the hadith in these 6 or 9 books are more, what? They're more authentic, right? They're more sound than in other spaces or in other books. And like we said, this will give me a skewed perspective. If I need to, and I want to understand the narrator, I need to look at what? A select sample of his narration, or I need to look at all of his narrations. I need to look at all of his narrations, and I want to share some statements that I think are very important. And the opposite of just investigating singular reports because they are not reflective of his ability to narrate. Right? If I'm just looking at 1 or 2 hadith, does that give me an idea about the narrator? No, it doesn't give me, and it doesn't give me enough insight concerning him. So Imam Ahmed, he said, I would defend Al-Waqidi until he narrated this hadith. Like there's a hadith he came across from Al-Waqidi, and he said he narrated something that's inexcusable. And because of that singular narration, what did he do? He rejected all of his narrations. So I could be studying 100 hadith of this guy, or 1,000, or 2,000, but I can just find one that would cause me to actually reject his narration. So you have a few examples. You have Al-Hakam ibn Atiyah and Amr ibn al-Hakkam. These individual reports, which is interesting, their reports are actually not in the nine books. Their reports are actually not in the nine books, which give us an idea of where these would be rejected. So there are different types of narrators that we all know that there is a difference of opinion about. Those that are spoken about, and this is like a group of people where I find a lot of statements concerning that narrator, but they are conflicting. The other type, the one that has a few narrations. So if a person only has one or two narrations, does that make it easier or harder to make a ruling on him? It actually makes it more difficult. Why?
Data.
Huh?
You don't have enough data.
I don't have enough data. I don't have anything to compare it to. Then I have those where I have some reports, and these I can actually do a research on them because there are enough reports now to actually do the comparisons. An individual who has many reports, these are actually the easiest, right? Because now I have enough comparative data to give me information about them. The mukhtalitun, these are individuals who changed, and we had spoken about this. Why does that change? What changed?
Something happened in their life or their age, or
right? So there's some trauma, or in their age, something happened that what?
that's affected their preciseness. It affected their job.
Yeah, it affected their memory,
Memory, yeah.
right? It affected their memory, and it affected their ability to narrate. And lastly, the mudallisun. So what is a mudallis? You guys remember? We spent a lot of time in the Muslim class. Huh? Oh, they hide narrators. But which narrator do they hide specifically?
Intermediate.
The intermediary. Thank you for reading. Right. So basically, you have now this person. He's saying that, okay, for example, like Uthman isn't here today, but he says, and he goes, he's like, oh, Sheikh Farhan said. Who did he hear it from? Right? He heard it from one of you. But he didn't mention any of you. So what did he do?
He skipped the chain.
Right? He skipped the intermediary. So he did tadlis. Right? He did tadlis. Mudallis. Right? So an individual's mudallis, plural would be mudallisun. Huh?
Tadlis is the action.
Yes. So these are the individuals where there's a difference of opinion. So in this, if I would either deal with this individual singularly, right, where I only speak about this individual, and this I can do because of the number of reports about that person. And the number of reports that they narrate, it becomes easier to study because I'm focusing on that individual. The other thing I can do is I can group them together. So what is an easy way to group narrators together so I can actually pass a general ruling on those narrators?
Grouping narrators.
Yeah, grouping narrators. So we had spoken, I think we touched on this in the Muslim class, where we spoke about choke points. And we spoke about bottlenecks. How does that happen? So if I have, so for example, in this class, right, you have me, and then let's say 5 of you go to narrate forward. How much research do I need to do? And I heard from my sheikh, right? I studied with my sheikh, I'm bringing the information forward, and now I have 5 of my own students who are taking this information forward. How much research do I need to do into the 5 students?
Up to you.
Right? Because where's the choke point?
You.
Me, right? The choke point is me. So where do I need to spend most of my time researching? You need to spend most of your time researching me. طيب. But if my 5 students agree on a piece of information, how much research needs to go into that?
Not a lot.
Not as much, right? Not as much. As long as I can prove that they are what?
Students.
Well, okay, that's number one. I need to prove that they're students, right? If they're not my students, like, if somebody from Kansas said, oh, Sheikh Farhan said, all right, is that person going to be trustworthy?
No.
Most likely not, right? But if you say, okay, no, we know these people, they actually lived in the area and they attended his classes, how much, we said we do less research. What do I need to prove though? I need to prove something.
Their level as narrators.
Right, I need to prove their level as narrators in general. And is it possible I group them together?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did I group them together? Where did I put that choke point?
They're
Their teacher. And this is something that is very common. So what is the way to make the commonality? Say the students of the Imam or the narrator or the Sheikh, and you can put a general ruling on them. So that's one way of doing it. Or you have from a certain area, from a certain city, from a certain village, right? That's a very easy way to group them together. So there are two ways, like we said, to do this. Either I can focus on a particular narrator, or I can focus on a group of narrators. So grouping narrators is not something that was done very early. This actually happened later. There was more focus on individual narrators early on. So those with few narrations, how do we deal with that? Right? These are called the muqillin, right, or muqillun. That they have very few narrations, sometimes only one or two. So this requires an extensive research, meaning that any place that this person is mentioned, I have to bring that information out. And I have to identify who this person is, what he did, because I have nothing to compare it to. And how can I arrive to a conclusion about this person? What are some things I should look for? If I only have one or two narrations about someone, what are some things I should look for?
Who's his shaykh?
I should look at who his sheikh is, for sure. I should look at his students as well. So what are some things I can look for to help me here? I want you guys to give me certain signs that I would look for to say that he's trustworthy. What are some things I should look for? Just on the data that we have so far. Like I have one chain.
You only have one chain.
I have one chain, one hadith. One hadith, there might be, he's the bottleneck. Yeah. And that hadith only goes through him. Does that give me confidence or does it not? Right, it doesn't give me confidence. Why?
Because there's not much information to confirm that.
Right.
Or you just leave it alone.
I can do tawaqquf, right? I definitely can suspend my ruling on it, but someone might be like, well, actually there's enough information here for me to make a ruling. So what are some things I can look for, or what are some signs I would seek to help me make that ruling?
Contemporary that spoke about him.
Okay, that's definitely, like, who spoke about him? Right, I need to see, like, did the Imam speak about this person? I don't really have a lot of information there. There's like one person said he was righteous. That's all I have. Huh?
That should be enough.
So I'm saying he's righteous. Is it possible he made a mistake?
Yeah.
Right? And because there's nothing to compare it to,
You cannot.
I can't I can't pull out and I can't determine if he made that mistake. What else can I look for?
There's the generation.
Like what? What do you mean?
Like if it's a tabi.
Sure. So the earlier it is, right? The earlier it is, the more likely that it is sound, right? Why? Because the likelihood of unique narrations, there's more of a chance for me to accept it where in the generation of the chain, right? The higher it is, right? The higher it is. The later I find individual reports, the more likely I am to. The later, yeah, the more cautious I'm going to be, right? But the earlier it is, the less cautious, and the more likely that it is that something like that would be narrated. What are some other things I would look for? If his teacher is weak, does that give me more or less confidence? It gives me less confidence. But what if I see that his teachers are strong, his students are strong, the hadith that he's narrating is not a issue that would be well known?
So it's not like about a fatwa.
It's an issue that is like, it has nothing to do with the 5 pillars, for example.
Yeah.
Because something concerning the 5 pillars, does it make sense that you'd have an individual unique report? No. It's relatively early in the chain. All of these are doing what now? All right, they're giving me more confidence in giving a ruling. The meaning doesn't sound crazy, right? The meaning, it sounds like
Logical.
it's logical, it fits within the Sharia. This is giving me,
Confidence.
this is giving more confidence. And I found 1 or 2 statements saying that he was somebody who was righteous. Do you think that this is generally enough information to be like, his hadith are accepted? Yeah, I would say yes. right? Because there's no contradictory information. He's not saying anything that has nakara in it that would have a bad meaning or would be against the Quran or the Sunnah. His teachers and his students, they look to be sound. And it's an issue that's not that big a deal. And it's an issue that wouldn't be well known. All of these are very confidence-inspiring and instilling issues. طيب. An individual who has some reports. So how do I determine that, right? So how do I determine someone who is muqil and someone who is mukthir, right? How do I determine someone who has few reports and someone who has a lot of reports? So my shaykh, he kind of put this, dhabit. So it has to be enough to justify a college thesis, whether that be a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis. And in general, this is how it works in many of the Eastern universities. If I can gather between 150 and 180 narrations or reports, it's enough for me to do a master's thesis on that individual. If I can find between 250 and 300 reports, it is enough for me to justify a doctoral thesis to study that individual. That's it. So this requires a complete study of those narrations. Right? This requires a complete study of those narrations, but even these we can classify into two categories. There are those narrations that for sure we can say that are his. And there are those narrations that are his lone reports, right? I'm sorry, that cannot be attributed to him. How do I determine that? How can I determine what's his and what's not? I have to look at the chain, right? I have to look at the chain. I actually have to do a study now because I have to gather what? All of the narrations, even the ones that might look a little shady, right? So I'm going to gather all these narrations, then I'm going to go through what I gathered that mentions him, and I'm going to determine what is actually his. And then from there, I have two ways to dealing with that. He's going to have two types of reports. Those which he shares with contemporaries, right, and other narrators, and those which he narrates alone. But the ones that he shares, like, so for example, if I have reports that he's sharing with others and they agree, that gives me what? That gives me confidence in the narrator. And these few lone reports that he has, what do I do? How do I judge those? Right, so I have to look at, those require more research, and I'm going to use the same type of methods that I mentioned before, right? How early is it, right? You know, who are the ones that narrated? Who did he narrate from? Who is he narrating to? What is the topic that he's discussing, and what is the topic that he's narrating on? So all of those would be criteria I would use to judge those hadith. But if I find that in general he shares narrations with others, that will give me confidence in his lone reports. Because over here, what am I trying to determine? Like, if I find that, okay, all his other reports that he shares, he's in parallel with someone and he shares, and the meaning relayed is still the same, then that proves to me what? Yeah, he's trustworthy, right? In general, I would say that he's trustworthy. So with these lone reports, what is the issue that I'm trying to find or determine? Right. So if it's a lone report, right? So I can't determine if it's going against. But what am I looking for? Is it possible that what? That he made a mistake. But if I'm finding over here he didn't make any mistakes in his narration, right? Because he's agreeing with everything else. The possibility of him making a mistake in these, it goes up or down? Right. It goes down. It goes up.
No, I mean, on the loan report?
Yeah, on the loan reports it goes down, because if he was somebody who made mistakes, what would happen? We would see it here. We would see it here. But if we don't see that, then that means that there's a chance that he did not make mistakes here either. Like, does it make sense that he wouldn't make any mistakes here, and then all of a sudden in his loan reports he would only make mistakes in his loan reports? No, right? Is it possible he made mistakes in some? Yeah, right, that possibility still exists, and those will require examination, but the chances of that are much lower. Somebody who has a lot of reports, how do we deal with this person? So those hadith that are in the 6 books, these books are the most studied and examined books in Islamic history. I can find any narrator in any single one of these books, and I will find scholars who have meticulously written their biographies and reported them and recorded them. So me finding about their hadith is very easy. Those hadith that are gharib, right, that are anomalous or that are strange, they might have hadith that are there too. These are also recorded, so it's relatively easy to find them. The hadith that are mentioned in the books of ilal, right, those books that have these hidden defects. So there are a few major works that are important for this. Al-Kabir by Imam al-Tirmidhi, Musnad al-Bazzar by Imam Bazzar, Ilal by Ibn Abi Hatim, and Al-Ilal by Daraqutni. So these are the major books of ilal. And the book of narrators, right? The book of narrators. These are the spaces and the places where I'm going to find those narrators that have many narrations. Because there's so many of them, and because they're so prevalent, it's actually very easy to find all of these discussions around them, right? They are the most discussed ahadith in hadith literature. They're the most discussed ahadith. So it's very easy for me to determine and to take information concerning them and about them. Yeah, I should have. I didn't complete my thought here. Yeah.
Number 3 categories, those are collections of all.
Ilal, yes. Yeah.
So if you see some like a low report, something like that, you can go and.
There's a good chance that I can find it here, or not. Right? So, it really depends. It really depends. So over here, Imam Abu Zura al-Razi, he said, I observed or I examined 80,000 hadith of Ibn Wahab in Misr, right, what is in modern day Egypt, and I don't recall even finding one baseless hadith. So what does that say about Abdullah ibn Wahab? Right, he's sound, right? He's sound and he's precise. He's like, man, I went through all of these hadith of his, and I have yet to find a shortcoming.
So back then, their memory was so great that they would memorize 80,000 hadith?
It wasn't about like having better or worse memory. We had talked about this previously, and I know some of you guys are younger.
It was a thing.
It was a thing, right? It's like you have this huge cultural push, and going, like there are different sciences that are popular to get into. And we said that at this point in time, what was the hot science? Hadith, right? If you wanted to become famous, if you wanted to do anything, like this is just something that everybody was studying.
It's like IT,
right? It's IT today, right? Or not even IT, like more specifically, what is that? No, well, AI is good too. What is the security, right? Cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity right now, it's like everybody and their mom is like, you know what I mean? Like we're getting into cybersecurity. Is everybody going to be good in cybersecurity? No, but it's what? It's just a hot thing, right? This is the thing that everybody wants to get involved in. This is the thing that everyone wants to study. And it's the same thing with the Islamic sciences. At that point in time, hadith was the one that was very popular. Then after that, for most of the history of the Islamic Ummah, what was the one that was most popular? What is the one? Like, yo, if I huh? Right, but fiqh, right? Like Sharia, fiqh, that's the one I want to study because that's where what?
The government, the money.
Well, that's where the money is. Yeah, that's where the money is, and that's where the government was giving payouts. So that's the case. So Shamila, this is actually a modern indexing program. That's kind of old, but good. It's an indexing research program where basically it has anywhere, depending on the version you have, anywhere between 4,000 to 12,000 books in the index. And if you type the name Abdullah ibn Wahab, just type it in. It's like putting it into Google, right? If you put Abdullah ibn Wahab into the research program, you'll get 45,000 hits today. But will all those be a hadith? No, that will be every single mention of this person. This will be every single mention of Abdullah ibn Wahab. So it's going to be his biography every time he's mentioned. If there's any fiqh stuff that's regarded and mentioned, like said in that. So look at this is 45,000 hits. Shamila, yeah, Maktabat al-Shamila. I think there's an app available on Android and Play Store. But, yeah, Play Store and what's the other one? Play Store is the Android one. App Store, sorry. It's in Arabic, yeah. Yeah. So over here you have 80,000 hadith and 45,000 hits. What is that? No, I'm saying, what does that tell us, though? A lot of reports that are what? Missing. Ahsant. There are reports that we don't have. There are chains that are missing, that have not reached us. The mukhtalithun, these are again, I forgot to change this. But the mukhtalithun, these are individuals whose memory has changed. So here, this confusion or this change, did it reach a point where it would cause his narrations to be rejected? So an individual can change, but what if that change is minor? It doesn't affect his narration. Sometimes, and there are people who are like this, right? Sometimes they might forget their way home, they might start forgetting their keys, they might start forgetting things in their day-to-day life, but when it comes to narration, they're still sharp. Would such a person would be called mukhtalit, right? Such a person would say, no, he changed, and toward the end of his life, but would it affect his narrations? No, it wouldn't.
It would still be sound.
Right, his narrations would still be sound. And so you over here, you have two examples. Sayyidina Abi Aruba, yeah.
Should it be still kind of with precaution or take it?
You can. So the question is, how do you take those precautions, and what do you look for? And we'll talk about that, inshallah. But over here, you have two examples: Sayyid ibn Abi Aruba and Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i. Both of these individuals are mukhtalit. But what is the difference? His narrations were rejected, and his narrations were still accepted.
First one, he precisely was gone.
Yes. Yes. He was making mistakes, but it wasn't enough to affect his narrations.
When you say rejected, it means at a certain time.
At a certain time.
Right? But
right.
Everything that came before.
Yes, and these are conditions that we're going to talk about, inshallah. So, and the ability to differentiate from those that heard from before him, which is what you just mentioned. So, if I know that this student only sat with him before he changed, all of those narrations would be what?
Up to that point, accepted.
They would be from this narrator. So he has a student. The student sat with him for 7 years, and then he left, and then 3 years later he changed. So this student, he never even what? He never sat with him after he changed, right? He only sat with him when his memory was sharp. So his narrations, if he brings any narrations from that sheikh, what would happen? His narrations would be accepted. Why? Because he never met him afterward. But if I have a student that I know that 3 years later he changed, and then a year later he had 2 or 3 students that sat with him, what would I do with those narrations? Okay, so those would require investigation. Why? Because there are certain things that are important to keep in mind. Because just because a person changes, does that make all of his narrations rejected? No. Because that just means that now a person who has reached a stage of forgetfulness, his propensity or ability to make mistakes is what? It's high. It increases, but does that mean I reject everything that he says? No. So his rejection rate might be 20%, it might be 30%, it might be 80%, right? But that depends on the individual, right? And it depends on the level of ikhtilat. Because it doesn't, like we said, it doesn't mean that all of his narrations are actually mistaken. Ibn Hibban, he says, and this is his introduction to his Sahih. He actually has a book that he wrote with the condition that the hadith in that book are Sahih. It's called the Taqasim wal Anwa'. Right? It's called like how do you translate that? It's like types and categories. Like that's what basically the title is. He has 5 sections in the book: obligations, prohibitions, permission, recommendations, and disliked things. So he has these 5 categories, and under those categories he has a hadith.
Was it the book that was like actual rulings or no?
No. So he says, and he writes this in his muqaddimah. So this is in the introduction to this book, his Sahih. He says the Mukhtalitin at the end of their lives, like Al-Jariri and Sayyid ibn Abi Aruba, right? And their likes, but we narrate them in our book, and we do not rely on their reports except in the following situations. That those older trustworthy narrators that narrate on them before they changed, right, which we mentioned, that those narrations that those trustworthy narrators agree with in other reports, and we have no doubt in them. So if I find he narrates and it agrees with other sound reports, then that narration is accepted. So what is he saying here? You guys are waiting for me to read it. So lazy. That's what happens. I want someone to give me a summary. What is it that Ibn Hibban is saying?
Basically, if they changed, but then you can still prove that they're trustworthy, then they're trustworthy. But then if they changed and they share narrations with other narrators, then you can accept those narrations.
All right, let me ask this in a different way. You're right, but let me ask this in a different way. Essentially, he's saying that a narrator that is mukhtalit, and he was thiqa and he was trustworthy before he changed. What is the ruling on him after he changed?
Still good.
He's still thiqa. He's still thiqa. That's what he's saying.
You don't
I don't do what with him?
like you cannot accept. I mean, no.
I don't what?
Disagree.
No.
Of course
label him, I guess.
I can disagree. Why not? Huh?
Label him, like, I'm sorry, not label him.
I don't reject him.
Reject him, like
What do I do? What am I rejecting?
the narration.
The narrations that what?
Or that he made.
That I know that he made a mistake in. So basically what Ibn Hibban is saying is like, just because he's mukhtalit, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's all he's saying here. That's all he's saying. So this is why using the sihah is important. So
basically, that answered my question earlier.
Yeah. Yes.
Don't be precautious, but still
Absolutely.
You do the job.
No. You used to do your due diligence. Like yes, but his narrations, our baseline is that we initially accept them, but we will do more investigation. So there are 4 that are clear, that are actually titled Sahih. There are 6 books in general that we say that make it a condition of accepted hadith. But what are the 4 that have Sahih in their title? Bukhari and Muslim. Good. And one we mentioned just like a few seconds ago. 2 more. Hadith students. May Allah guide you. Ibn Khuzaymah and Ibn Hibban. The books that critique. So these are like Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Sunan al-Kubra by Imam al-Nasa'i. All of them will say that there's some kind of weakness or there's a problem in the hadith. Books of Ilal, very clear, right? Because in those, they specify those are hadith that are differed over and what the shared reports are. The books of Gharaib, or the strange narrations, these contain narrations of mistakes and misconceptions, right? So, al-akhta' wal-awham. So the mudallisun. We'll stop here. We'll take this next week, inshallah. This is a slightly longer discussion. So it should take up the time next week, bi'idhnillah. And then after we finish this, I will, inshallah, in this week I'll decide in the direction that we're going to move with this class. We might start going through hadith books, specifically, in Mustalah. All right? Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin, nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.